Welcome to The Debate. Today we are putting the kidneys on trial. Or, rather, we are putting the testing of kidneys on trial. We are conducting a rigorous examination of the physiological interplay between creatine monohydrate and renal function. It is a topic where biochemistry violently clashes with clinical reality.
It certainly does. I mean, we are looking at a molecule that is arguably the most researched ergogenic aid in history. It is in every gym bag from here to Tokyo, yet it carries this persistent, ghostly reputation for destroying kidneys. It's a medical narrative that just refuses to die.
Precisely. And the central tension we are unpacking today is this. Is the kidney damage attributed to creatine a legitimate physiological toxicity? Is the molecule actually physically hurting the organ? Or are we looking at a massive, decades-long methodological error in how we measure health?
Right, and that is the exact question. I am here representing the side of caution. Not because I think creatine is poison, I know the performance data is solid, but because I believe that when you introduce a compound that fundamentally breaks the diagnostic tools doctors rely on, you enter a danger zone. You create a blind spot where real disease can hide.
And I'm here to argue that the blind spot is an illusion. My position is backed by an overwhelming body of evidence confirming that for healthy individuals, creatine is unequivocally safe. The damage people fear is just a misinterpretation of basic metabolic markers.
Well, let's see if we can clear the air then.
I want to start by anchoring us in the sheer weight of that data. We aren't guessing here. The clinical perspectives review we've analyzed draws on a massive data pool. We are talking about more than 12,800 participants across over 680 trials. These aren't just weekend observations. We have data ranging from 5 days to 5 years, with doses reaching as high as 30 grams a day, which is a massive load compared to the standard 5 grams. The consensus from major bodies, like the International Society of Sports Nutrition, is clear. Creatine monohydrate does not harm the renal system in healthy populations. My argument is that what we are seeing in the frightening case reports is actually pseudo-renal failure.
Pseudo-renal failure. It sounds nice, doesn't it? Like a magic trick.
It is a benign mimicry of disease. The kidney is functioning perfectly. The blood test is simply lying to you.
And that is where I have to push back. You say the blood test is lying, but in medicine, the blood test is often all we have to make rapid decisions. My thesis is that while average safety is high, the safe for healthy people label is doing a lot of heavy lifting. Sources like the Dr. Oracle Protocol and Standard Nephrology Guidelines explicitly state that creatine is contraindicated for patients of chronic kidney disease, or CKD. Why? Because it creates diagnostic chaos.
I agree on the chaos, but not the cause.
Furthermore, we cannot ignore the edge cases. We have animal models suggesting cyst growth acceleration. We have case reports of acute tubular necrosis. You can call it pseudo-failure all you want, but if a patient walks into my clinic with valid warning signs and I ignore them because, well, it's probably just the creatine, I am practicing negligent medicine.
Let's get into the mechanics of that diagnostic chaos, because I think that is the heart of the misunderstanding. We need to talk about the creatinine conundrum.
Right. For the listeners, we need to clarify the difference between creatine, the supplement, and creatinine, the waste product.
Exactly. It's a supply and demand issue. Your body stores creatine in the muscles to create energy. That creatine naturally degrades. It spontaneously breaks down into a waste product called creatinine. This creatinine floats in your blood until the kidneys filter it out. Roughly 1 to 2% of your total muscle creatine stores break down every day.
And that waste product, serum creatinine, is the gold standard proxy we use to estimate kidney function. We call it eGFR, estimated glomerular filtration rate. To use a simple analogy, think of the kidney as a garbage truck and creatinine as the trash bags on the curb.
Go on.
We judge how well the garbage truck is working by looking at how much trash is left on the street. If the trash is piling up, if serum creatinine is high, we assume the garbage truck is broken. That is the fundamental logic of nephrology diagnostics.
That is the perfect analogy, but here is the flaw in the logic. If you take a creatinine supplement, you're effectively doubling the amount of trash you put out on the curb. You are loading your muscles with extra fuel, so naturally there is more breakdown. The garbage truck, the kidney, is working perfectly fine. It's working at normal speed. But because there is suddenly way more trash, the blood levels rise.
So the doctor drives by, looks at the street, sees high trash levels, and thinks the truck is broken.
Precisely. It is a false positive. It's a check engine light that is malfunctioning. And we know this for a fact because when researchers use measured GFR, the results change completely.
Explain the difference between estimated and measured GFR for the audience. This is technical but vital.
Estimated GFR is just a math equation based on that blood test. Measured GFR is where they inject a tracer like inulin or 51-CR-EDTA and physically watch how fast the kidney filters it out. It is the actual speed of the garbage truck. The reviews from Frontiers and Dr. Oracle are fascinating here. When they use these gold standard tracers, kidney function is normal, even when serum creatinine is through the roof. The truck is fine, you just gave it more work to do.
Okay, technically, physiologically, I agree with you. If you have a perfectly healthy kidney and you dump extra creatinine in, you get extra creatinine out. The filter is intact. But, and this is a massive but, we don't do 51-CR-EDTA tests in the real world.
Well, because it involves radioactive isotopes and takes hours.
Right. You can't do that at a strip mall walk-in clinic. You can't even do that in most emergency rooms. So in the real world, the diagnostic artifact you are dismissing is a serious problem. If I have a patient whose eGFR drops from 90, which is healthy, to 60, which is borderline because their creatinine spiked, I have to act. I can't just assume it's the supplement. What if they actually do have kidney failure coincidental to the supplementation?
That is a valid clinical dilemma, but we cannot blame the molecule for the limitations of the test. Let me give you a specific example of why we need to trust the mechanism. Look at the study by Gulano and colleagues from 2010. This is one of my favorite pieces of evidence in the literature.
The single kidney study?
Yes, they found a young man with a single kidney. He had reduced renal reserve by definition, a high-risk profile. They put him on a high-protein diet plus 20 grams of creatine a day.
Which is a loading dose. That is a huge amount for someone with one kidney.
It is, and predictably, his serum creatinine rose, his estimated GFR dropped significantly. In a normal clinic, the doctor would have tackled him and ripped the shaker out of his hand. But because this was a study, they measured his actual filtration using that 51-CR-EDTA tracer.
And the result?
Unchanged. Completely flat. The solitary kidney was filtering toxins at the exact same rate as before. The blood test alarm was ringing, but there was no fire. This proves that the rise in creatinine is benign, even in a system that is already under pressure.
I will grant you that is a compelling N of 1 case. It shows the resilience of the organ. But let's look at the other side of the coin. You call it a benign artifact, but there are case reports that suggest otherwise. We cannot entirely dismiss the smoke implies fire argument when the smoke gets thick enough.
You're referring to the case reports of failure.
I am. We have the 1998 Lancet report by Pritchard and Kalra. We have reports of acute tubular necrosis, actual tissue death in the kidney, and an 18-year-old taking recommended doses. These aren't just high numbers on a lab sheet. These are pathologies. People ending up in the hospital with organs shutting down.
But we have to deconstruct those cases, because simply citing them induces fear without context. They almost always lack ecological validity.
How so?
Take the Lancet patient. Yes, his kidneys were failing, but he had pre-existing focal segmental glomerulosclerosis, a scarring disease of the kidney filters. And more importantly, he was taking cyclosporin.
Which is a heavy-duty immunosuppressant.
It's a drug famous for being nephrotoxic. It kills kidneys. Blaming the creatine in that scenario is like blaming the rain for a flood when the dam is already burst. The creatine might have slightly elevated the marker, but the cyclosporin was doing the damage.
Fair point on the cyclosporin. But what about the 18-year-old? The case in NDT Plus by Tanner and colleagues. Healthy kid, recommended dose, acute tubular necrosis.
The healthy kid who is supposedly a bodybuilder? This brings us to the elephant in the room, polypharmacy. The Clinical Perspectives Review highlights this repeatedly. When these case studies are investigated, you rarely find a person taking only creatine monohydrate.
True. The case of the 24-year-old bodybuilder with rhabdomyolysis is the prime example. He was in full renal failure.
But when they checked his regimen,
He was taking 52 different supplements.
52. I can't even name 52 supplements.
Exactly, he was taking a chemical cocktail. Anabolic agents, diuretics, vast amounts of protein stimulants. You cannot isolate creatine as the villain in that soup.
I accept that polypharmacy confounds things. However, that demographic, the young male lifter, is exactly the demographic that overlaps with extreme exercise. You can't separate the user from the usage. Rhabdomyolysis, extreme muscle breakdown, releases myoglobin, which is incredibly toxic to kidneys. If creatine allows you to train harder and you train yourself into rhabdo, the creatine is part of the causal chain.
That is an incredibly indirect link. That's like saying running shoes cause kidney failure because they allow you to run marathons, and marathons stress the kidneys. Rhabdomyolysis raises creatine independently of supplementation. The creatine molecule itself isn't the toxin there.
Let's step away from the chain rats for a moment. I want to look at the biology itself. There is animal data that we shouldn't brush aside. The study by Edmonds and colleagues on Han.sbrd-C rats.
I had a feeling you would bring up the rats.
It's important. These are rats bred as a model for cystic kidney disease. When they were given creatine, cyst growth increased and disease progression accelerated. The creatine seemed to feed the pathology.
But you have to acknowledge the translation gap. Rat data in the context of creatine metabolism is notoriously difficult to map onto humans.
It's still a mammalian model of renal physiology.
But the metabolic handling differs. Humans absorb and utilize creatine with very high efficiency. Furthermore, we have human clinical data that contradicts the fear of accelerating disease in vulnerable groups. Look at the studies on older adults with type 2 diabetes or postmenopausal women. These are populations at risk for renal decline. The Frontiers Review cites studies showing that even in these clinical populations, creatine did not impair kidney function.
Did not impair function on average and during the study duration. But this brings me back to my core concern, the pre-existing condition. Most of the safety studies you cite, those 680 trials, have explicit exclusion criteria.
Explicit trial design.
They exclude people with CKD. So we are building a fortress of safety data based on a population that is already defined as having resilient kidneys. We are saying it's safe for people who don't have kidney problems. That's a tautology.
It's not a tautology, it's a safety baseline. You don't test a performance supplement on critically ill patients initially.
But we aren't just talking about critically ill patients. We're talking about the millions of people with undiagnosed mild renal insufficiency. If you have an eGFR of 55, stage 3A CKD, you might not know it. You feel fine. If you start taking creatine and it drives your creatinine up further and it potentially stresses the filtration system, as suggested by the rat models, are we sure it's safe? The Dr. Oracle guidelines state clearly that creatine is contraindicated for eGFR under 60.
I agree with the contraindication, but again, I have to clarify the why. It is contraindicated because it makes monitoring the disease impossible. If a patient has CKD, their doctor needs to track their decline accurately to dose medications and plan dialysis. Creatine supplementation throws a wrench in that tracking. It creates noise in the signal.
It's not just noise to the patient, though. Take dialysis patients. The literature suggests they might actually be creatinine depleted because they lose it during dialysis. Logic would suggest they need it. It could help with muscle cramps and fatigue, but we discourage it. Why? Because we cannot risk the diagnostic chaos. We are prioritizing the test over the patient's potential benefit because the test is flawed.
But we can solve the diagnostic chaos. We don't have to rely on serum creatinine. The science has moved on, even if the clinics haven't. We have cystatin C.
Cystatin C, the holy grail.
It really is. Cystatin C is a biomarker for kidney function that is completely independent of muscle mass and creatine metabolism. It doesn't care if you're a bodybuilder or if you're taking 10 grams of creatine a day. The Frontiers Review and the Dr. Oracle analysis both point to this. If a patient wants to take creatine or needs to take it for its neuroprotective benefits, which we haven't even touched on, the physician can simply switch to monitoring cystatin C. The danger of the blind spot disappears.
In an ideal world, yes. But let's be real about the healthcare system. Cystatin C is not routine. It is more expensive, and many GPs don't order it as a first-line test. They might not even know to order it. So the patient is left in that gray zone.
Then the solution is education, not prohibition.
There is another layer of risk we haven't touched on, Purity. We talked about the bodybuilder with 52 supplements. But what about the average person buying a cheap tub off the internet?
Contamination.
Exactly. The Frontiers Review mentions the issue of unapproved pharmaceutical ingredients. If you're buying street creatine, unregulated tubs, you aren't just getting creatine monohydrate. You might be getting heavy metals like mercury or lead, or hidden diuretics.
Which are definitely nephrotoxic.
Right. So a case study of creatine causing kidney failure might actually be lead poisoning causing kidney failure. The renal safety profile source warns about this. If you have a sensitive kidney and you ingest a heavy metal contaminant, you are in big trouble.
That is a valid concern for the industry, but it is not an indictment of the molecule. That is an indictment of quality control. We advise people to use third-party tested products, like those with the CreaPure seal. When we talk about the physiology of creatine monohydrate, the pharmaceutical-grade substance used in trials, the data holds up.
It holds up for the healthy, I will concede that. But I'm looking at the NHNAS data, the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey.
Which supports my point. That is population-level data. They looked at adults consuming high amounts of dietary creatine. The risk of kidney dysfunction was not elevated. In fact, some data suggested those with higher intake had better health outcomes.
Correlation is tricky there. People eating more creatine are usually eating more meat and are likely younger and more active. But let's look at the aging population. We are now encouraging older adults to take creatine for sarcopenia, that's age-related muscle loss.
Which is a huge benefit. Preserving muscle in the elderly prevents falls and fractures. It's a critical intervention.
Agreed. But a 70-year-old's kidneys are not a 20-year-old's kidneys. Their renal reserve is naturally lower. If we tell a 70-year-old with undiagnosed mild CKD to start loading creatine, we are obscuring their eGFR right at the moment they need it most.
Actually, the Frontiers Review explicitly mentions studies on older adults, including frail older adults and those with rheumatic conditions. They found no evidence of renal impairment in these groups.
No evidence of impairment. But were they using cystatin C to check, or were they just seeing stable high creatinine?
Most of the modern studies are aware of this and account for it. And remember, the rise stabilizes. It doesn't keep climbing. If you have real kidney disease, creatinine goes up and up and up. With creatine supplementation, it goes up slightly and stays there. It establishes a new baseline.
Unless, of course, they develop progressive renal disease from another cause, like hypertension, and we miss the early warning signs because we assume the high level is just the new baseline.
That is a risk of interpretation, I concede. But we are weighing a theoretical risk of a misdiagnosis against proven benefits for muscle, cognition, and rehabilitation.
I'm not arguing against the benefits. I'm arguing for the asterisk. The asterisk that says, if you take this, you are entering a gray zone of medical diagnostics.
I think we can agree that the gray zone exists, but I want to be very clear. The molecule itself is not the villain. It is not attacking the kidney cells.
The molecule is not a villain, but it is a trickster. It wears the mask of kidney failure.
Let's bring this to a close because I think we've illuminated the core tension here. From my perspective, the evidence is overwhelming. For the vast majority of the population, healthy adults, creatine is safe. The kidney damage narrative is an outdated relic, fueled by a misunderstanding of how creatinine is measured. The rise in blood markers is a false positive, a laboratory artifact caused by the conversion of creatine to creatinine, not a failure of filtration.
And I maintain that while the molecule appears non-toxic to healthy tissue, safe is a relative term. When it compromises diagnostics, my position is that for anyone with underlying, perhaps undiagnosed renal issues, or for those taking nephrotoxic medications like NSAIDs, the risk profile changes. The burden creatine places on medical testing, rendering eGFR inaccurate, is a real clinical issue that can lead to misdiagnosis or compromised care.
We certainly agree that transparency is key. If you supplement, you must tell your doctor. Don't let them guess. And if there is doubt, we have the tools, like cystatin C, to find the truth.
Exactly. Don't fly blind. If you have chronic kidney disease, avoid it. If you suspect you might, get tested before you start. And if your doctor panics over your blood work, ask for the better test before you schedule a biopsy.
A rigorous approach to a complex topic. There is certainly more to explore in the material regarding specific populations, but the takeaway is clear. Respect the physiology, but don't fear the phantom data.
And always double-check the label for purity.
That's it for this debate. Thank you for listening.